When it comes to thinking about vice presidential debating, I don't think anybody has summed up the issue as clearly and succinctly as former Admiral James Stockdale here in the 1992 vice presidential debate.
Who am I? Why am I here?
Now, putting aside the issues of 1992, which is a crazy year for lots of reasons that we'll get to in the next video, he's right. We really don't know who you are or why you are here. Why do we have vice presidential debates in the first place? What's the point of them? Where did they come from? And what value do they possibly serve? Well, if you'll remember, in 1960, there were 4 debates in the Kennedy-Nixon debates, and a 5th debate was proposed, where at the beginning, each of the vice presidential candidates would be given about 10 minutes to give a speech. Now, why would that be important for the campaigns to want that to happen? Why would the Kennedy campaign want that to happen? Well, it goes back to a little bit of political history. Now, for the most of the history of our country, the vice president is usually the first loser. They're the person who gets second place. They serve as vice president in the presidential elections. The idea of running mates comes along later, and the idea of people running together on a slate, an agenda, kind of comes along when we get away from this attitude of the party is what you're voting for, and these are the leaders of the party that will take the mantle of the presidency if asked by their people and country to serve. Now we kind of have agenda setting and strategizing. And Kennedy picked Johnson because Johnson was a Texan and would give him some legitimacy as a elite Boston native with the West and the South. Might make him a little more palatable. These kind of thoughts about the vice presidency you can read a lot about them. There's a lot of stuff in political science and in campaign history about these kind of strategies. But in the debate, it also allows these people a way to communicate from another point of view the platform and the policies of the presidential candidates. And I think that might be why they're valuable, is they just give us another perspective on things. But the vice presidential debates have had their share of ridiculousness, and most of the time when I think of vice presidential debates, I think of ridiculous stuff. I'm going to share some of my favorite moments in the history of vice presidential debates in this lecture. But first, when was the very first vice presidential debate? Well, it occurred in 1976 between Walter Mondale, who was a senator from Minnesota, Democratic nominee for vice president for Jimmy Carter, and Robert Dole, the Republican senator from Kansas, who was the running mate of Gerald Ford. After that, the vice presidential debates become kind of standard, and they even go up into the commission era. We have them every year. They're really a lot of nondescript, not a lot of incredibly famous moments. Now they've kind of been settled. Today, we're deep in the era of commission debating, so there aren't really a lot of stones to turn over and look underneath. Everything's pretty much mapped out the way the parties want it to be. So there's not a lot of innovation or stuff going on. But I do want to share a couple of great moments. First, this is from the vice presidential debate in 1984 between Geraldine Ferraro, longtime serving member of Congress, and Vice President George H.W. Bush.
I think I just heard Mrs. Ferraro say that she would do away with all covert action. And if so, that has very serious ramifications, as the intelligence community knows. This is serious business. And sometimes it's quiet support for a friend. And so I'll leave that one there. But let me help you with the difference, Ms. Ferraro, between Iran and the embassy in Lebanon. Iran, we were held by a foreign government. In Lebanon, you had a wanton terrorist action where the government opposed it.
Let me just say, first of all, that I almost resent, Vice President Bush, your patronizing attitude that you have to teach me about foreign policy. I've been a member of Congress for 6 years. I was there when the embassy was held hostage in Iran, and I have been there, and I have seen what has happened in the past several months, 17 months, with your administration. Secondly, please don't categorize my answers either. Leave the interpretation of my answers to the American people who are watching this debate.
Now, this is the nightmare PR situation that makes people want to avoid doing any kind of presidential debates. This idea that you would intensely and aggressively sort of attack an issue and then be accused of sexism is really, really bad press. Unfortunately, it didn't really help defeat Reagan or Bush, who pretty much swept in that election and won. Didn't really have much of a play or effect, but this is the kind of embarrassing news clip you don't want circulating around, is when someone's responding in the heat of the moment, responding aggressively the way they would without thinking about perceptions in the debate, and then being schooled by somebody like Congresswoman Ferraro, who understands very much how this is going to play visually, very much how this is going to play with her base and supporters, and how it's going to look in the media. I think it's a great moment on Ferraro's part and really shows her brilliance in debating. George H.W. Bush, for all the debates he did, in fact, he's someone who debated more times than anyone else in presidential debate formats. I think he still has the record. No one else has debated that many times. He should know better. And he should have a little bit better practiced skill set for presidential debates. But rhetorically, Ferraro makes the right move here. It's really beautiful and really great to watch. And it is a gaffe on the part of Vice President Bush, I'd say. Now, a few lectures ago, I talked about Ronald Reagan as the GOAT. He's the best presidential debater we've ever had, and I don't think we're going to have a better one. His turns of phrase, his viral moments, his appeal to the context and the moment he's in is just overwhelmingly good. There is an opposite, though. The person who's the worst at debating in all time has got to be Dan Quayle. Here he is, trying to, with a lot of frustration, deal with a series of questions that came in the vice presidential debate of 1988, where he was taking on Senator Lloyd Bentsen of Texas. So in 1988, the panel of journalists are asking Dan Quayle, "You're very young. Do you have a plan for when you might become president?" See, the funny thing is the way that vice presidential debates are usually justified is not through political strategy, but through this trope that the vice president is a heartbeat away from the presidency. And this many times this century, the vice president has been called to serve as president. So we should really know something about your plan. 3 or 4 of the panelists in this vice presidential debate asked Dan Quayle directly, "What's your plan if you ever had to serve as president?" And he really kind of didn't really have one. He kind of answered in a kind of a weird way. And then he responded with a phrase that he had used on the campaign trail many times, comparing himself to John F. Kennedy, saying, "I had the exact same amount of time as a congressperson. I've served that amount of time in the Congress as John Kennedy did when he became president, so therefore I'm ready to serve." Now that argument is an enthymeme, which is an Aristotelian form of argument where a premise is left out that the audience is supposed to complete. Enthymemes don't work if that adherence isn't really there. So the idea that you've served as many years as John Kennedy doesn't really seem to stick, and Lloyd Bentsen took huge advantage of it here.
I have as much experience in the Congress as Jack Kennedy did when he sought the presidency. I will be prepared to deal with the people in the Bush administration if that unfortunate event would ever occur.
Senator Benson.
Senator, I served with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy. What has to be done in a situation like that? In a situation like that,
you're only taking time
is to call in the
from
joint.
your own candidate.
That was really uncalled for, Senator.
You're the one that was making the comparisons, Senator, and I'm one who knew him well. And frankly, I think you're so far apart in the objectives you choose for your country that I did not think the comparison was well taken.
Now, here's the question. Is this a gaffe on the part of Dan Quayle, or is Dan Quayle just bad at debating? I mean, his advisors told him not to use that line. He used it anyway. And Lloyd Bentsen is consummate rhetorician in the way he responds to that. It just looks so good. Unfortunately, yet again, we see it doesn't really translate to anything in voting or in poll numbers, which raises some questions about commission-style debating. Does it really have any impact on the election? Does it really do even the bare minimum of what the commission says it does, inform voters on the issues? Just note that poor Dan Quayle, we're not done with him yet. But in 1992, he participated in the 3-way debate between Admiral Stockdale, who we've already heard from, and Senator Al Gore, who was Bill Clinton's running mate in the 1992 election. This debate is considered to be the most out of control, most ridiculous, and probably the most embarrassing debate for the Commission on Presidential Debates, because not only does it show that their model is insufficient and doesn't allow for debate to occur, but it shows the ineffectiveness of having a memorandum of understanding that the candidates agree upon and no hard rules that exist outside of that agreement between the two parties. The candidates can kind of do whatever they want. The moderator is kind of powerless, and it ends up being a disaster and somewhat embarrassing that American democracy looks like this.
Take the NAFTA agreement.
Oh, wait a minute.
How long did he have to just wait
I know you want to change the subject, Dan, but let's stay on this one for a while.
How long did he have to wait, or how quickly did he change his position on education? He changes his position all the time.
Let's stay with this issue
Bill
for a while.
Clinton has trouble telling the truth. The 3 words he fears most.
Does anybody have any view about the appointment of judges on this?
Truth.
Yeah, I want to talk about this, because the question was not about free trade or education. The question was about.
You're the one that brought up the issue of waffling.
Dan,
and he is waffling on the abortion issue.
Let me talk now. It's going to be a long evening if you're like this now, because
no, it's not.
Don't change the subject. Don't change the subject, because what you have done.
Answer my questions. On the 24-hour waiting period, do you support that?
I have had the same position on abortion in favor of a woman's right to choose. Do you support a woman's right to choose?
Do you support a 24-hour waiting period to have reflection?
Talk about
avoiding the question.
Now, wait a minute. Let me tell you why this is so important.
Now, if these are our leaders and these are the people who are supposed to be running the country, how do we expect to fare very well at all? This model really had the commission questioning how the debates are going to go in the future, and they've moved to a pushback on the campaigns to where there are going to be these sort of standards of non-interruption, not a lot of direct interaction between the candidates, which always is in the memorandum, but the commission has started to enforce that a little bit more. But we still get this incredibly bad model because the commission debate is not modeled on appropriate debate. It's modeled on fighting. Just getting people to say whatever they want, when they want, and respond to each other however they want, with no standard, no format that tells us what evidence is, what an argument is, and what you're supposed to do in a speech. This is a basic model of all debating formats around the world. The Commission on Presidential Debates ignores it. All they want is a chance for the members or the candidates of the two parties to speak, and the vice presidential debate is another one of those opportunities. Unfortunately, we are the ones who lose out. I don't think the parties do at all. They get plenty of speaking time and plenty of time to activate their base, their supporters, to go out and support them. But do we get an exploration of issues that matter to us? I'm afraid we don't. And the vice presidential debates, I mean, who are you and why are you here? It's really the only thing I have to say.